Chapter 11. Murder in Paradise.
At around 2:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, August 16, 1953, someone from the administration came to our quarters in Alofi and awakened Elder Bailey and me with the horrifying news that a group of young men had attacked and murdered Commissioner Larson. Mrs. Larson had also been wounded and was in critical condition. Their daughter Thelma was all right, as was their young son Billy, who had run down the hill to Alofi to sound the alarm. Our messenger said he thought the murderers planned to kill all of the Papalagi, or Europeans, and that we should come with him to gather together for protection. We quickly pulled our clothes on and went to a house with a wide vista around its perimeter. The women and children were gathered inside. We younger men stood guard outside. Because I'd had military training, Police Chief Harry Williams gave me a .45 caliber military pistol, which I kept in my belt while on guard duty. When it became light, we went up to the Larson home, where we found a terrible scene. Mr. Larson's body had by then been placed in a body bag, which was in a wooden box in the hall. The bedroom was a horrible scene with blood everywhere. Mr. Archie Jacobson, who worked for the administration, was the only person at the Larsons' home when we arrived. He explained that at about 1 a.m. that morning, 6 prisoners had broken out of the prison farm. 3 of them, armed with big bush knives, headed for Mr. Larson's home, which was only a short distance away. After cutting the telephone line, they entered the home and went directly into the bedroom, where Commissioner and Mrs. Larson were asleep. They surrounded the bed and started hacking away at Mr. Larson. He was nearly decapitated and lived only 1 hour after the attack. He was able to tell the doctor who his attackers were. Mrs. Larson had jumped out of bed and began defending herself by raising her arms against the bush knives. She also began yelling and screaming loudly. Her screams probably saved her life and the lives of her children, because the attackers were scared away. However, she had received many life-threatening wounds. Her arms were broken in 4 places, and she had a wound on her forehead. She was hospitalized for a few weeks and eventually recovered physically. However, I don't know if she was ever able to get rid of the nightmare of the experience. Our hearts went out to her and her family. Elder Christensen and Elder Slade were taking their turn staying in La Kepa and working on the other side of the island. They got word of the murder about an hour after Elder Bailey and I did. Elder Christensen recorded the following in his journal. Brother Togiatama came knocking at our door about 3:30 a.m. and told us the very sad news that Mr. Larson had been killed. Mrs. Larson was in critical condition in the hospital in Alofi. Mr. Williams, Chief of Police, sent Elder Slade and me a warning to make it to Alofi as soon as we could possibly get there. So we packed up a few things, got on our bicycles, and took off along with Togiatama and Powitolu. They arrived safely in Alofi. Elder Slade also recorded his version of the events. About the most horrible thing that I've ever seen or heard of was the sudden murder of our resident commissioner, the good Mr. Larson. Because of Elder Bailey's infected foot, I was staying with Elder Christensen in La Kepa. On Sunday, August 16th at 1 a.m., Mr. C.H. Larson was attacked while in bed asleep and brutally chopped to death with a big native bush knife by some of the native boys who were in prison and broke out. Mr. Larson's wife was also seriously injured by the same boys. She is in the Niue hospital now with severe lacerations. The 3 attackers' names were Foli Tolu from Hiku Tavake, Tamaeli from Liku, and Lato Atama, known as Suka, from Tuapa. Suka was reportedly the one who had killed Mr. Larson. Suka had previously inscribed the following in Niuean on his bush knife. I am Suka, the Niuean hero. Greatest love to the people of Niue. Good luck. I am going to die for my people. As resident commissioner, Mr. Larson was the judge of the High Court of Niue. As judge, he administered the law and gave prisoners their sentences. He was a strict disciplinarian. Some say he was a bit rough on them. Some say he was too rough. These prisoners, all under age 25, were men with fairly long prison terms to serve. They had apparently decided to escape and get rid of Commissioner Larson to pay him back for his alleged cruelty to them. Surely their actions were premeditated. As dawn began to break, we all gathered at the police station, where groups of Niuean men were being organized into search parties. They searched all day, but had no success finding the killers. Funeral and burial. Island law required that the dead be buried on the same day death occurred, because there were no embalming facilities or funeral homes. Mr. Larson's funeral was held at 3 p.m. Nearly all the people of Niue, people from every village on the island, were present. Many formed a funeral procession that accompanied the body from the hospital at the south end of Alofi to a church building near the administration office. Most of the islanders walked slowly and reverently behind the caravan of vehicles. We rode in one of the government cars. Mr. Larson was laid to rest in a royal spot of ground in the center of Alofi, ground reserved for those of high status. His grave was dug in the very hard, solid rock next to the grave of King Tuitoga, who had reigned from 1876 to 1887. This was a fitting place for our friend, who had nobly served the people. On the evening of the funeral, Elder Christensen wrote, "Mr. Larson was a wonderful man and our very good friend. He did a great deal in making it possible for the Latter-day Saints to get started here on Niue. He was a happy man at all times, and will be greatly missed by all who knew him." The first day under siege. Although Niue is a small island, there were plenty of places for the murderers to hide. Elder Christensen recorded, "There are so many caves on the island as well as thick bush and plenty of kai food, that these killers could stay in the bush for a long time and never be found. 100 square miles of rock and bush is a lot of territory to cover. It's not going to be easy to find them, but they will probably want some cooked food and a smoke, so they'll more than likely give themselves up. I hope they are caught soon. It sure makes a guy nervous when he knows he's wanted by some killers." The day after the murder, August 17, 1953, Elder Christensen recorded, "This morning a search party from each village went out looking for the 3 murderers of Mr. Larson, Suka, Folitolu, and Tamaeli. Search parties were out all day and found no signs of them at all. I went over to the bachelor's quarters for the European government workers, as soon as it got dark. Again, I was up for most of the night keeping watch. They are really after all the papalagi. Mrs. Larson's condition is improving a little today." All night guard duty. All of us elders stayed up all night on guard duty and tried to get some rest during the day. My guard duty was at the house where the women and children were staying. I still had the .45 caliber pistol in my belt. We tried to comfort and reassure our Niuean members and even some of our Palagi friends that things were all right. We felt that the murder was the work of a few enraged escaped prisoners who would soon be caught, and we assured one another that we needed to have faith that the Lord was with us and would take care of us. Many Niueans later told us that the other Papalagi on the island were not really in great danger because the killers were focused primarily on the resident commissioner. However, since the commissioner's wife had also been attacked, it was a good assumption that others might also be harmed. The precautions taken were proper under the circumstances. The second day under siege. This was quite an experience for men as young as we were. Elder Christensen recorded a poignant moment in his journal the following day, August 18, 1953. "My birthday today. I am 22 years old. The search continues again today for Tamaeli, Suka, and Folitolu. Someone thought they saw them at Liku, so trucks took all of the Alofi men up to Liku to search for them. Some had guns, some had clubs, many had bush knives, so they were ready to hunt. At the end of the day, there was no sign of them, so tonight I went over to the batch to keep watch again." the third day under siege. Elder Bailey recorded the following in his journal. We had to take turns at guarding the Pelagi ladies of the village. This we did all night. The 3 men who got out said that they were going to kill all the white men on the island. We had pistols and rifles to guard with. Whenever the church bell would ring, it would mean that the 3 men had been sighted. There were many wild goose hunts. Elder Christensen wrote on August 19th, 1953, No sign of the murderers yet. A woman from Hakupu was in the bush getting food and said she saw Suka. He asked her if she had any cigarettes. He frightened her, so she ran back to the village. All the people were brought over to the Hakupu area. They looked all day for them, but couldn't find them. Mrs. Larson has been improving quite a bit. The 4th day under siege. The following day, August 20th, 1953, Elder Christensen recorded, I had been up most all of the night on guard duty. I had just gone to bed when Mr. Empin got me out of bed at 6 a.m. He said the 3 murderers of Mr. Larson have been caught and are now in the village of Fatia'u. I went over to the administration with Mr. Empin to do some work with Mr. Williams. Others took trucks and went out to pick up the prisoners. How the murderers were captured. Elder Christensen later recorded the details concerning the capture of the murderers. The constable at Fatia'u was having one last look around his village before getting some sleep at about 5 a.m. when one of the prisoners, Suka, the leader, came out of the bush. He yelled at the constable, calling him by name, saying, Don't shoot, and don't be afraid. We want to have a talk with you. As soon as he said this, Folitolu and Tamaeli came out of the bush. They all went up to the constable's home for a talk. They had no bush knives on them. In fact, all they had in their hands was a Bible that Folitolu was holding. He was the pastor of the group, of all things. The weather here on Niue has been very cold the last couple of weeks, really too cold to be a tropical island. Apparently these men had been so cold and chased around so much these past 4 days that they couldn't take it any longer. Also, one of the main reasons for the surrender was for a smoke. They said they couldn't go on any farther without having a cigarette. This was the first thing they asked for when they got into the constable's home. Also, they couldn't take it any longer because some Niueans are very superstitious and believed they could not stay in the bush at night without being afraid of the Aitu, the spirits of the dead. The constable had a talk with them for a while, then put handcuffs on the 2 bigger men and called up Alofi with good news of the capture. Folitolu was pastor, so he read the Bible for them while they were waiting for the police to come from Alofi. In Alofi, they were taken to the little jailhouse in the back of our home. They had about 10 guards watching over them. People came from all over to have a look at these sad men, the killers of Niue. It felt good to get back home in our own beds and get a good night's sleep. However, before going to bed that evening, Elder Christensen, Elder Slade, and I biked out to Avatele for a meeting. It was the first meeting we'd had for almost a week. Displaying the prisoners. The prisoners, all under 25 years of age, were a sad-looking group. However, they acted very proud and arrogant and called themselves Niuean warriors. They had convinced themselves that their own people would be sympathetic and have mercy on them. They would soon find out differently. As the authorities were bringing the prisoners to Alofi, Chief Williams decided to stop at the village of Avatele so the villagers could see the prisoners in captivity. The villagers all gave loud, threatening yells of displeasure, giving the murderers quite a scare. The truck with the prisoners arrived in Alofi at about 7 a.m. Mr. Slavin, acting resident commissioner, had all the people of Alofi gather at the administration building where they could see the murderers. Again, his objective was to make examples of them before the rest of the people. As soon as Folitolu, Suka, and Tamaeli were taken out of the truck for exhibition, all the people began to sneer and yell at them. Then Joe Jackson really let them have it verbally. Some of us felt that the people wanted to hang them right there on the spot, but of course they didn't. It later became clear that putting the prisoners on display for public ridicule and verbal abuse was a mistake. because the families of the prisoners had to listen to this and bear the shame of it in their small communities. Reactions of the Niuean people. When the news of the resident commissioner's murder was first made known, the initial reaction of many Niuean people was to find and lynch whoever had committed the crime. Murder is contrary to the Niueans' nature, no matter what the circumstances. Many of the islanders wanted to bring swift retribution to the murderers because of the great shame the act had brought upon them. Fortunately, the murderers were not found for 4 days. This period was long enough to give the Niueans time to evaluate the situation properly and to cool down. After the killers finally gave themselves up and explained their motivations, the attitudes of some of the people began to soften, at least enough to seek appropriate justice rather than lynching them. For the most part, the people of Niue were in a state of deep hurt and shock. There was an aura of great sadness among them. Most of them recognized that Commissioner Larson had worked hard to ensure and strengthen their basic freedoms, such as freedoms to live by the rule of law. He had also been a champion of freedom of religion, including freedom from fear of oppression by religious cursings. Many Niueans agreed that changes were needed. However, in the eyes of some, Commissioner Larson had ended up creating fear of a different kind. Some felt that he was trying to make dramatic cultural changes in a system that, of itself, wouldn't easily change. Most agreed that Commissioner Larson had been a strict disciplinarian, but they also knew that there was no justification for murder. Although many had not appreciated the methods he had used to accomplish his goals, I believe many islanders appreciated him more than they had shown. Therefore they were angry, embarrassed, and ashamed of this terrible act. Commissioner Larson, Niue's good friend. It would be many months before things would really get back to normal. The Niuean people carried an aura of sadness and shame for a long time. Even today, some have a hard time thinking about or discussing the matter. The murder was indeed a great tragedy. I'd had the pleasure of spending many hours of discussion and recreation with Mr. Larson. I enjoyed being in his company and learned many things. During those times I learned of his great desire to serve and strengthen the Niuean people. He knew the people, and he wanted to help them progress. In turn, most of the people respected him for the good things he tried to do for them. He had one large obstacle, however, one in which we were involved: providing freedom of religion. The one religion, while having exclusive domain on the island of Niue for more than 90 years, had good intentions in trying to keep all other religions off the island. They believed that a choice of religions would create friction and discord among the villagers and destroy peace and harmony. It was as if the Niueans could not be trusted to govern, or be governed by a rule of law, but that they had to be governed by fear of heavenly retribution. This erroneous thinking would certainly explain why the use of religious cursing was so prevalent. But as a result, the people lived in fear and oppression. The government was not able to function fully if it did not please the existing ecclesiastical hierarchy. I believe that Mr. Larson tried very hard to help the people break through that oppressive social order and live in greater freedom under the rule of law, and truly have freedom of religion. Commissioner Larson, a friend of the church. We all greatly missed Commissioner Larson. He had been a strong advocate for the Mormon Church's presence in Niue. He knew us and trusted that we would contribute in positive ways to the lives of the people. He was indeed our good friend. I sincerely believe that the church would not have been established in Niue without the help of Commissioner Cecil Hector Watson Larson. I believe that the Lord had a hand in directing him to us, or us to him. We will always remember him. When President Otley learned of Mr. Larson's untimely death, he wrote the following in a letter to me from Rotorua, dated August 21st, 1953. The terrific shock of the year is the Larson tragedy. I can't quite realize that such a thing has happened. Yet such things do happen in a crazy, mad world, and nothing can stay them until the promised millennium when the devil will be bound. Any courtesy the mission can render the family, we shall be more than happy to do. They have certainly been friends to us. A prophetic statement by President Otley. When I received this letter from President Otley, I remembered something he'd written to me more than 5 months earlier, on March 11, 1953. When discussing our work in Niue with its successes and difficulties, he made a rather prophetic statement. This matter of crude hoodlumism is a natural consequence of the type of tactics normally engaged in by the opposition. I never saw it fail. It always follows the same pattern. One would think that Satan, with all the help he has, could be a little more original. It will pass over, but someone may have to be stricken before it does. I hope not. That is the Lord's problem, not ours. A trial for the murderers. Since Niue had no airstrips or harbors, the closest police backup help was on the islands of Samoa, 3 days away by boat. A small motor vessel with additional police and detectives left Samoa the day after the murder and arrived in Niue on August 21st, 1 day after the killers were apprehended. On September 4th, a second boat, the Maui Pomare, arrived at Niue bringing a judge, court clerks, and lawyers so that a trial could be conducted. The trial began on September 7th at the Tufukia School. We were able to attend many of the sessions and found them interesting and informative. The trial ended 2 days later. All the defendants were found guilty and were condemned to hang by the neck until dead. A new trial. After the trial, there was much controversy concerning whether the hanging should take place in Niue, New Zealand, or Samoa. Still later, there came much public outcry against the use of capital punishment, and an appeal was made. As a result of the appeal, the sentence of death by hanging was revoked and was changed to life in prison. As of this writing, all 3 murderers are deceased.